All right, AMP1 students, we're going to finish talking about energy. So I'm going to pull up our objectives. And so we're just going to talk about the different forms and classes of energy. And then we'll also talk about the molecules. These are like the macromolecules that are important in providing energy for our cells. So we'll talk about those too. All right, so first let's talk about the two main classes of energy. So we have potential energy, and I always like to refer to that energy as the stored energy, and I'll give you an example of that. And then the kinetic energy, and that's the energy of motion. So that's usually energy that's moving and causing work or making work happen. So, all right, and then realize that this potential energy can be, remember it can be transferred or converted or changed to kinetic energy, but then also kinetic energy could be converted or changed or transferred to potential energy, so go back and forth. So I'm going to go back to our picture of ATP, and I'm just using the ATP molecule as an example, but realize other molecules you can, this could happen with as well, but I'm just using this particular picture. Okay, so the potential energy is the energy that isn't doing work. It's just energy that has the potential to do work, so it's usually like stored somewhere. So this little bond here, whenever it was formed, it took energy to form it, and so now that energy that formed it is now kind of locked inside this bond here. So there's energy there that can do work, but it's stored, it's not currently doing work. So then if that bond is broken, then we can, so this would be our example of potential energy. So it's stored, and it's in position. I guess they call it, energy of position too. So it's in this position, but because it's in that position, it can, once that bond's broken, it can start to move. So, okay, so that's the potential or energy of position, or stored energy. So then whenever that bond is broken, then we get our kinetic energy. And so this is the energy of movement. So this energy is going to go and move and do work. And so there's different types we'll talk about of kinetic energy. So the main one we're focused on for stored or potential energy is chemical energy. So chemical energy is our main example for energy in the body that is potential or stored. So that's the one and it's the most, significant one in the body, the chemical energy, because we're made up of chemicals. So, all right, so the kinetic energy, I'm going to go back to our textbook so you can see the different types of kinetic energy. We already talked about one in the last video, and that was mechanical energy. So that was the energy that allowed for something to move, and I don't know why. There it comes. Oh, there we go. For some reason my mouse didn't want to work for me. Okay, so let's see what they got to say. And then we'll give you some more examples too. Then there's our kinetic energy. There's like a little list of it. Yeah, so here's chemical energy. That's our example of potential energy. And then the kinetic energy, we talked about mechanical energy. So any energy that's exhibited by an object in motion. So like, so I usually use the term of muscle contraction, but there's some other examples too. Pumping action of the heart too. So still involves muscles though. We also have electrical energy, which we will talk about that. That's the movement of charged particles. So we will talk about, and those are ions. Remember, charged particles are ions. So we'll talk about electrical energy. So some of the energy that is transferred from chemical energy can be transferred to electrical energy, and that happens mainly in the nervous system when we have a nerve signal being sent from one area of the body to another. And then we also have sound energy. That'll deal with more of our sense of hearing. So we can have the energy transferred to sound energy as well. And then radiant energy, which everybody's probably familiar with that. We usually associate that with the sun. So, and then that's also when we're talking about our sense of vision, it's radiant energy that's being detected and transferred into the brain for us to interpret what we're seeing. So, and then remember heat. It's also a form of kinetic energy, but it's the one that doesn't do work. So sometimes it's not used for work, so they call it a unusable form of energy. But it's very important in the body because it helps to maintain our body temperature. So they kind of say it's a waste and stuff like that, but it is, I guess, in the sense of it can't do work, but it's very important in keeping our body temperature in that normal range. So it plays a role in homeostasis. All right. So that was our first two objectives. Talked about the two classes of energy, potential and kinetic, and then some examples of potential energy, which is mainly chemical energy, and then some of kinetic energy. So the last thing we'll talk about in this video is our three important molecules within the body that function primarily in chemical energy, which means they're usually the ones that our body will break down their bonds, and so that way we can get energy from those bonds. So the body will generally only break down certain molecules in our body for energy. The only time it'll go for other molecules, because other molecules could provide energy as well. They have like energy stored in their bonds. But that's only when you've used up these other molecules. So we don't like to go to, and that's mainly because there's certain molecules that are, intended to provide energy for our body functions, and there's certain molecules that have more important functions, and we'd really rather them do that rather than provide energy for the body. So proteins would be an example. So like our body can break down proteins and get energy from them, but proteins have so many more important functions within the body that's what they should be doing. The only time our body would start to break those down is if we don't have enough of the molecules that's like the carbohydrates and the fats to get energy from. So it usually indicates that there's a disease in the body or malnutrition, something like that. Okay, so let me go to our three. So triglycerides, remember that was an example of a lipid, and that's generally if we eat something that has fats or lipids in it, usually it's in the form of a triglyceride. It has a glycerol and fatty acids. Made 3 fatty acids since it's a triglyceride. So triglycerides, and then glucose, that's the carbohydrate that's in our blood. But remember, it can also be stored as glycogen in our liver and our muscles too. So our cells will break down the bonds in triglycerides to get energy, and also break down the bonds in glucose to get energy. And then remember, ATP is the storage form of energy in the cells. So it's got this readily available energy for the cell to do work. So most cells will have some stored ATP. All right, so those are our 3 important molecules for chemical energy storage. So that's where we get most of our energy. All right, so we'll see you in the next video, and we're going to talk about chemical reactions. So specifically like the different types of chemical reactions, we give them a name. So we want to make sure we understand how chemical reactions are occurring in the body and what the particular terminology is used for each one of those. So we'll see you in the next video.